How can we make music naturally blend into a game? Can music be an effective tool to send a message to the player? I've been experimenting with a concept called adaptive music, and I want to share the outcome of my experiment, the theory behind it, and some conclusions. I am definitely not an expert, and this is not a tutorial. I thought it would be interesting to experiment with adaptive music within the context of a horror game. I built this forest environment inspired by the Netflix series Dark, which also has a great soundtrack I could use as an inspiration for the scene's music. This is a quick preview of the results I achieved. Pay attention to how the music becomes more terrifying as the character gets closer and closer to the cave at the end of the path. The audio there came from the game. It was not edited for the video. The game knows how to alter the music to build the environment in the right moment for the player. We will see the full demo later. Let's first discuss how this works. So what is adaptive music? Adaptive music is music that changes or adapts in response to events in the game. Unlike in movies, video games don't usually follow linear scripts, and when things happen depends on the player's decisions. Game designers have no way of knowing when players will perform a particular action, and thus music producers can't compose a piece assuming fixed times to sync with different events, again, as they can do for movies, for example. This is why the video game industry introduces the concept of adaptive music. Many techniques fall under this definition. I'm going to mainly focus on just one, which I believe is a good entry point to understand the paradigm shift. This method is usually referred to as vertical mixing, and allows us to compose music pieces with no time limit that we can adapt in real time for various purposes. This is achieved by designing the song as a set of small looping tracks that are constantly in sync and go in and out of the composition according to the producer's artistic choices. In this context, sound experts usually call these tracks stems, and they are a critical piece for vertical adaptive music. The fact that these audio files are designed to be stacked in and out of the song allows us to build a sensation of progress and to make seamless transitions to convey different emotions. And making this loop constantly makes it possible to play the adaptive song indefinitely to the player. Now, what do we do with all of this? How can we make the music change? The basic idea is to control the volume of each stem from a game variable. This can be whatever makes sense in your game. In my experiment, I wanted the song to become more and more horrifying as the character gets closer to the cave. So my variable was the distance from the player to a fixed point in space, the cave entrance. The smaller this distance, the more creepy the music gets. When the character walks towards the cave, different distance thresholds trigger turning up or down the volume of the looping stems, revealing and hiding different parts or variations of the same musical piece, all of them designed to sound good together and communicate diverse messages. We can go a bit farther to get better results. Volume is not the only factor of the stem we can modify. We can also make real-time transformations to the sound by applying effects. We can adjust pitch, apply distortion or reverb, mess with the colorization values, and many other things. And we can do this not only to one particular stem, but also to a group of them. For example, in my experiment I applied the distortion effect to all the music stems when the character is low on health points. And I also muted the music altogether when the player walks away from the expected path. The idea in both cases is to make the player notice an important event, using the music itself, keeping an immersive experience. So in this particular example we have 3 game variables controlled by the player, a total of 8 stems constantly looping and in sync, following the instructions of the sound designer, and basically 2 audio transformations, volume and distortion, sometimes affecting a track individually and sometimes a couple of them at the same time. Let's see the full demo. Pay attention to how the game variables impact on the music, and try to understand how a player would perceive these changes. The demo is accompanied by several charts showing what's going on behind the curtains. Take your time to check them out individually. I'll come back with some conclusions after this. That is the result of my experiment. I think it's pretty cool. I found adaptive music to be a great way to communicate relevant game events to the player, while keeping or even improving the atmosphere. It results in a very immersive experience and is quite useful to guide the player in the right direction. From a technical perspective, it is rather easy to implement, but this of course depends on the game variables and how this impact on the music. The key items to remember to do vertical mixing are: music should be built as a set of stackable stems. These stems are always looping and in sync, and game variables affect stems by applying effects. The most common one here is adjusting the volume. Most of these primarily impact the sound designer. Composing adaptive music imposes a different workflow, as they need to try their creations inside the game to quite literally play around to understand the outcome. This usually means working closer with the developers and more iterations on both sides. There are tools that can help bridge the gap between the sound designer and the programmer, usually referred to as middlewares. Examples of these are fmod and wwise. In my personal opinion, it is not necessary to use them to get started with adaptive music, as the learning curve can be quite steep, but they are a natural next step once you get used to the basics. They can help save some time for the developers and make it much easier for composers to test their creations using game variables, without running the actual game. That's all I learned from this experiment. This was I hope you found it useful. Please consider subscribing, check the description for some great videos on the topic, and see you next time.